Nuclear weapons can be compared with the internet and antibiotics as the most important invention in the history of mankind. There are few scientists who deny that atomic bombs have led to a sharp reduction in the number of global conflicts since the middle of the last century. Although wars on the planet continue, nuclear weapons have reduced the number of large-scale conflicts, as everyone realizes that armed clashes with the use of nuclear weapons lead to mutual destruction and become meaningless. However, there are myths associated with atomic bombs that are worth clearing up. For example, some argue that the insane lethality of nuclear weapons led to Japan's instant surrender. This is not the case, because even before the use of nuclear weapons, Tokyo was subject to destruction from American B-29 bombers, which caused significant damage in the city on March 10, 1945, destroying 40% of the residential area, comparable to what the atomic bomb did in Nagasaki. In one day of bombing in Tokyo, according to the most conservative estimates, 80,000 people were killed. In fact, from the point of view of World War II, there was little difference between atomic weapons and classical bombing. For example, on February 23-14, 1945, about 100,000 people died as a result of an Allied raid on Dresden. To not forget about chemical weapons, which can also be deadly, comparable to nuclear weapons. In 1935 to 1936, 275,000 Ethiopians died from Italian chemical weapons. The number of victims of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, even despite their significance, could not be compared with the main battles of the Second World War. Even in a couple of weeks of hostilities, such as in Bialystok and the Kaminsky Battle, the USSR lost 341,000 people, which exceeds the losses from atomic bombings. It should be noted that surrendered Japan capitulated mainly due to the entry of the USSR into the war, as stated by Emperor Hirohito in his statement on August 17, 1945. Although Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not mentioned in official papers, there is also a myth about atomic weapons, which is that the bombing wipes entire cities from the face of the earth, making them uninhabitable. Actually, this is not true. In a megaton-air explosion, the zone of total destruction is less than 4 kilometers. The average destruction is about 7 kilometers, and only 5% of the population will die only at a distance of 10 kilometers. This applies to classic modern bombs. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were much less powerful than conventional bombing. The main destructive factor in Hiroshima was the fire caused by typical Japanese wooden and cardboard buildings. Geographical location also played an important role, since the firestorm did not originate in the hilly Nagasaki. As a result, most brick buildings remained standing, demonstrating that atomic bombs, while scary, do not necessarily render cities uninhabitable. However, it is worth noting that we have much more nuclear capabilities at our disposal today, and humanity is capable of inflicting huge nuclear strikes on each other. But to think that nuclear weapons are cheap is a myth. The development and production of atomic bombs required huge costs. For example, the budget for the Manhattan Project in 1945 was 90% of the total for small arms and almost 40% of the total for tanks. 2 bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki cost as much as tens of thousands of tanks and planes. In addition, maintaining nuclear arsenals also requires huge costs. Modernizing nuclear warheads can cost millions of dollars each, and the total cost of the U.S. nuclear arsenal over a long period has been enormous. And the reduction of nuclear potentials is not an easy solution, as it requires significant efforts and funds. Even if you still have doubts, the following myth will dispel all doubts about the simplicity and safety of atomic weapons. It is believed that it is safe to handle and even play with nuclear weapons without causing dangerous situations. However, in real life, everything is much more complicated, and history knows many cases related to nuclear weapons that show their potential danger. An investigation by the DOE National Interest found that between 1950 and 1968, at least 1,200 U.S. nuclear weapons caused dangerous incidents. Some of these cases are extremely unusual. For example, in 1980, a worker in Arkansas accidentally dropped a wrench socket into the shaft of a Titan II rocket. This led to the breakdown of the tank of the first stage of the rocket and the leakage of fuel. Personnel were forced to urgently evacuate the area, but at 3 o'clock on September 2019, a W-53 nuclear-tipped missile exploded, blowing off the 740-ton silo cover. Although the warhead remained relatively unscathed, this situation caused serious concern in the U.S. command. Another dramatic story occurred on January 24, 1961, when a B-52 aircraft carried 2 thermonuclear bombs, each of which was 260 times more powerful than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. During the flight, a fuel leak was discovered, which led to the destruction of the aircraft and the death of the crew members. According to the instructions, the bombs were supposed to unhook from the aircraft, but problems arose. The parachute opened on only one of the 2 bombs, and 3 of the 4 fuses went off, bringing one of the bombs to combat readiness. The only thing that saved the United States from a catastrophe of unprecedented proportions was a low-voltage switch. However, the engineering troops had to look for the second bomb, as it scattered into the wreckage. Incidents with such errors are not isolated. Over the past 17 years, more than 1,000 such situations have been recorded. This confirms that nuclear weapons are dangerous and fraught with unrealistic consequences. The reduction of nuclear arsenals in various countries and the desire to reduce nuclear weapons can be explained by their high cost and danger. Continuing the discussion, we turn to another myth about the irreversible radioactive contamination of the area. However, it is worth noting that at present Hiroshima and Nagasaki are fully populated, which indicates that the radiation intensity decreases significantly over time. A few hours after the explosion, the level of radiation decreases several times, and after days and weeks it decreases thousands of times. Although leukemia among Japanese survivors of the bombing was twice the norm, this only affected a small percentage of the total population. Even when controlling the situation after the bombing of Hiroshima, where 40,000 American soldiers were involved, mass deaths from radiation sickness were not recorded. In addition, it should be emphasized once again the fact that the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the past were built mainly of wood and did not have specialized shelters to protect against nuclear attacks. Had there been adequate shelter there, the casualty figures would have been vastly different. An interesting example was the Bikini Atoll, where the Americans tested a 15-megaton hydrogen bomb. 4 years after the explosion, biologists found that meter-long corals began to bloom in the explosion crater, and the underwater ecosystem was completely restored. Thus, even with the explosion of all available atomic bombs, it would be wrong to assume that this will turn the Earth into a nuclear desert. The myth that a nuclear war could split the Earth arose during the Cold War. However, the reality is much less dramatic. A ground explosion of a huge 58-megaton munition, similar to the Tsar bomb, will create a funnel with a diameter of about 200 meters. Such explosions can be viewed from the standpoint of the formation of artificial lakes, as was demonstrated in 1965 during the creation of Lake Chagin. Even having dug a well 178 meters deep before the explosion, the funnel turned out to be only about 100 meters deep. The cracking of the Earth's crust, or the guaranteed tenfold destruction of life on Earth in the explosion of all nuclear warheads are myths. The level of urban legends. The average yield of current nuclear warheads is about half a megaton. Even if we consider a 5-megaton bomb and calculate its destructive ability on the total surface of the Earth, we get only about 70,000 of such warheads. Nevertheless, humanity has even 13,000 nuclear warheads that are currently available. The vast majority of them are much weaker than a 5-megaton bomb. If people decided to create so many warheads, it would require much more budgetary funds, and the risks of accidents and incidents would be so significant that such an idea would be unfeasible. As a result, we can conclude that nuclear weapons, despite their danger, are still not as scary as they are often presented in public opinion. U.S. intelligence says that a small number of nuclear warheads is enough to effectively maintain parity of forces and prevent a third world war. However, the fate of humanity will only be seen in time,